Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
Well, welcome to So Many Books, So Little Time. My name is Joe Nash. I'm here with Zina, Shevchik. We are both librarians here at the Colonie Library. The premise of our show is very simple, if you haven't seen it yet. Zina and I go down to the new bookshelf here in the library, and we go down to our technical services department, where all the new books are being processed. And we've brought up a bunch of new books to tell you about. And the selection is usually small because, as I've said many times, we probably get over 100 books a week. This is a small sampling of some new books that we're going to tell you about. So as usual, Zina will be going first.
Okay, this book was hard to ignore because it's so big and because it has that I Love New York logo on the front of it. And it is called I Love New York, Ingredients and Recipes. It's written by Daniel Hum and Will Gadara, probably I spelled it, pronouncing it wrong, of 11 Madison Park and The Nomad, which are restaurants in New York City. And it's a combination coffee table book because it has incredible pictures, photographs. Let's see, I marked one. These are just pictures of beans. It's a cookbook. And it's kind of a history of food in New York State. And in a way, it's a travel log because these two restaurateurs and chefs determined to find local produce, local food made, grown, produced in New York State. And they use many of these farms and their produce in their ingredients and their recipes in their restaurants in New York City. But it's each entry has a history of the farm that they're highlighting, and it includes farms from the Schoharie Valley. There's an old Chatham sheep herding company, which is out here near us. Let's see, there's something called the Flying Pigs Farm in Shushan, which is near Cambridge, and that's it's a wide range of ingredients that they're talking about, produce. They include fish, beef, venison, pigs, duck, goat milk, as well as apples. There's a Brooklyn brewery in Brooklyn that has a recipe for beer battered apples. Doesn't that sound good? There's in Seneca Falls, there's a farm called Rosencrantz Farms, and they don't grow steer, but they raise steer, black baldy steers, and they have a recipe in here for steak tartare. And as I said, each farm is highlighted, the history of the farm, what inspired the people to become farmers. In most cases, they're small family farms growing a very narrow group of produce or a specific animal, meat. It's arranged alphabetically by the produce. It goes from A for apples to W for walnuts. And it's just incredible. The recipes are designed to be cooked at home. They're not really fancy recipes. Even though they do use these recipes, they design these recipes that they've included in their restaurant kitchens. The recipes are simple if you can get a hold of certain ingredients, but I just found it beautiful, and it's worth it just to read about the different farms in New York State. And
all right, so that all the farms it's all New York State in there.
It's all New York
right,
State.
That looks pretty interesting, actually.
Yep, it is.
Very good. I may be going in a totally different direction here. I just didn't realize till I'm looking at all the books here I have a lot of books on the current situation, current politics, and politics of the last 4 or 5 years. So I may have a theme here. I'm not sure. I'm not sure yet. But okay, first book. It's currently, we're filming this on August 19th.
2013.
This book is on the bestseller list. It's called The Unwinding by George Packer. The subtitle is An Inner History of the New America. What he's done, he is sort of following what's been going on in America since the late 70s to the current moment through the story of all different people in different social strata, I think.
There you go.
And there's a lot about politics and all kinds of things. I'll tell you what he does. He mainly follows 4 people, and he alternates chapters in with some other things, and it's sort of chronological. But at the beginning of each section, there's a year, like 1978, 1984, 1987, 1994. He does this sort of montage, although montage is a film term. He writes a thing of what went on that year in little short sentences with a ... and so you get a sense of what happened that year. So
The context, yeah.
So you know what was going on that year. And the 4 people he follows is one guy's named Dean Price, who was a farmer down south, where he ran convenience stores and then became a farmer and then became an entrepreneur. It just goes through how his life changed from the late 70s to the current situation. I'm not done with it yet. I'm halfway through. He follows Jeff Connaughton, who works in Washington. He started out sort of young and idealistic, went to Washington working for Joe Biden. His story is really interesting, and he ended up being a little bit sort of cynical about politics, but he ended up being a big lobbyist, so that story is pretty interesting. He follows a woman named Tammy Thomas who lives in Ohio. Wait, I think it was Ohio. And she's from the poor inner city and her life, and she comes from a sort of bad situation, but she ended up getting a job in a factory, made some pretty good money for like 15 years, and then all the factories started closing, and then she started doing other things, so they follow her story. And they follow the story of a guy named Peter Thiel, who's a Silicon Valley billionaire. I think he had something to do, I didn't get to him yet. I think he had something to do with starting PayPal or that group. I'm not 100% sure. So through the story of these 4 people from the late 70s, and it goes chronological, you sort of see what was going on in America sociologically and economically, and he juxtaposes this.
Very good.
With some stories. These are really short 4 or 5 page little biographical sketches of people like Oprah Winfrey, Sam Walton, Alice Waters, Jay-Z, Elizabeth Warren, Newt Gingrich. And I think he's showing, a lot of these people, like Oprah, for example, they're always, well, if you just stick to it and this idea about America, work hard, you can always get to the top. And I think George Packer's saying, people like Oprah got to the top, but not everyone can. And these other people he follows, you get to see how America changed. And he follows people from all different, like the one guy's a billionaire, the internet guy. And so this book's been getting great reviews. Like I say, it's on the bestseller list. I'm halfway through. It's very interesting, and I would recommend it. Oh, he follows people like Andrew Breitbart. And then he has 2 sections called Institutional Man, where he takes 2 guys who worked their way up through government and what their story became. Like one is Colin Powell, and one is Robert Rubin. Colin Powell, if you know his story, came up, a big hero, blah, blah, blah. And then, unfortunately, when the weapons of mass destruction, whole thing sort of fell apart, and Robert Rubin, again, worked for the Clintons, came up, economist, we're going to change America, young idealistic, and he ended up being, I think, a big lobbyist and everything. So and he calls it the unwinding. I think he's seeing, at the moment, he sees all this stuff unwinding, I guess you could say.
The nose to the grindstone doesn't always work. It seems to me like you have to know what the trends are and what's happening. You have to have your eye on the future.
Yeah. But anyway, really good book, and a good look at the last, say, 30 years history of America.
That's you and me, Joe.
I know. I know.
For good or for bad. Okay, mine next book is historical, but it's nonfiction. It's not. I was going to say historical novel. It's not a historical novel. It's nonfiction. It's true, but it's written in a really exciting way. It's called 80 Days, Nellie Bly and Elizabeth Bisland's History-Making Race Around the World by Matthew Goodman. I always sort of knew who Nellie Bly was, but not quite. And this is really a wonderful story, and it really pulled me right in. And people remember Nellie Bly, but they don't remember this other woman called Elizabeth Bisland, who was also a journalist in New York City, worked for a competing, well, actually, I think she worked for a magazine rather than a newspaper. Nellie Bly was a journalist for Joseph Pulitzer's World newspaper, I think it was called. I think I've got that right, either New World or World newspaper. And Nellie Bly convinced her editors and publisher to let her try to beat Jules Verne's, oh my God.
Around the World in 80 Days.
Around the World
yeah.
in 80 Days. She wanted to do it in less than 80 days, and this was in the 1890s.
So this is a true story.
1890s.
It's not
This
a novel.
is a true
Oh,
story.
okay.
I know, but it reads like a novel,
yeah.
so that's what I was stumbling over at the beginning of this. She left New York City by steamship on November 14th, 1889. And she made it in 76 and a half days, but this other woman, Elizabeth Bisland, went across the country. She went in the opposite direction. She went counterclockwise.
Yeah.
And she made it in 70, I think I just mixed them up. I want to say she made it in 72 days. I just mixed them
Yeah.
up. Nellie Bly made it in 72 days, and I think Elizabeth Bisland made it in 76 days, something like that.
Now,
but nobody ever remembers Elizabeth
Were they
Bisland.
trying to follow it the way Jules Verne did, or no? Or they just had to go and see how long it would take?
They weren't trying to do it the way that.
But they tried to do it in 80 days.
They tried to
All
do
right.
it under 80 days, and at that time they were dependent upon the railroads
Yeah.
and the steamships, and but it also talks about who she was, how she remade herself, and the fact that no one knows who the other woman is now. And I just think it's written really well, like an adventure story, and it tells you a lot about what was happening in the world at that time and every place they went. It was excellent. So it got good reviews.
Yeah, I read some good reviews of that.
She was called Pinky Cochrane. That was her first name because her mother dressed her in mostly pink clothes when she was young to make sure that she was noticed. So she came from a very interesting background, and I think it's a really good book.
Okay, I know someone.
So 80 Days.
Someone read that. I know. So it was really good.
It is.
Now, my last book was called The Unwinding. Now, this book, I think Jonathan Alter, you might know him from cable TV news, and he worked for Newsweek. He has a new book out. I think he's trying to say The Unwinding. Is maybe not totally becoming unwound, but I don't have the book. I have a picture of the cover. It's by Jonathan Alter. It's called The Center Holds. You can see Obama there. What you can't see is the subtitle. It's called Obama and His Enemies. This book I read over the summer is really good. It starts in the 2010 midterms when the Democrats and Obama got totally shellacked, and it starts there. And then he goes into the rise of the Tea Party and Fox News, and he has some. And then it goes into the bulk of the book is about the 2012 election. So it goes into how the re-election campaign went, and he covers all those endless Republican debates. Was there like 20? Was it like 20 of them? 25?
There was a lot of them on the
lot.
stage. That's all I remember.
And then he has, but it's really interesting. One of the most interesting chapters are all the people all these big data computer guys that Obama's team had working in Chicago during the re-election or leading up to the re-election. They were all computer experts. Was there analysis or whatever? But they call themselves the Geek Squad or something. But there was like 20 or 30 of them in this little room, and they worked like 16-hour days, and they called it the Cave. And they ended up knowing they were going to win, and even though a lot of the other pollsters were wrong, all these computer guys knew they knew it was going to be close, but they figured they were going to win. So that's a really interesting chapter, all about how they
It's all
get it.
about
They get it
big data.
Yeah, they get it down to the precinct, actually, the block, and they figured out ways to go, how to contact people that they know would vote, and et cetera, et cetera. So that chapter was really good. There was a very interesting chapter on some of the states that were trying to suppress voting. The Voter Suppression Project was the name of the title, which is very interesting. There's a good chapter about Obama's personality. He's not a schmoozer, and he doesn't like talk. That played into why a lot of people thought he wasn't doing as well in the midterms there. Then it goes through the debates, and it goes through the election and everything. So a really good book if you're interested in following politics. Jonathan Alter's book, The Center Holds, the part you can't see, Obama and His Enemies. I should say Jonathan Alter's very sort of pro-Obama. Just by the title you can tell he...
Yeah, but the picture that's on there is pretty arrogant, so they didn't pick it.
Yeah. But a good, if you follow politics and stuff, it's a really good book.
Okay, I'm switching gears for sure. It's called Why We Write, edited by Meredith Marin, M-A-R-A-N. And I like this even because it's not a kind of a literary tome about, I'll call them literary writers or some of the higher brow writers. And it's short, it's a nice paperback. And I found it interesting that most of these writers are, that they're polling and assessing are what I would call popular writers. Terry McMillan, Walter Mosley, Sarah Gruen, David Baldacci, Michael Lewis, Jane Smiley, Ann Patchett, Jodi Picoult, Sue Grafton. They have thrown in there Armistead Maupin and Allende, Isabel Allende, kind of like, to me, it seems like a counterpoint. It's short. Each chapter kind of asks these writers why they write, and there's a few pages written about their demographics and their background and their list of their works, how to get in touch with them, if they're on Twitter, Facebook, etc., if they have a day job, and it lists any awards they have. But what's fascinating is the response to why I write, and most of them say they can't not write. Most of them say it's a compulsion, that almost the worst thing that could happen to them is if they couldn't write. But some of them are more systematic about how they write, when they write. Some of them have very full lives besides writing, so they have to schedule the writing. But I found it fascinating because I've read most of these authors, and it's interesting to hear about what room they go in, what time of day they write, what prompts their ideas. I really enjoyed it, and it's written in a very casual way, and they speak to you. They're writing, describing their lives in a very simple way, and so I really highly recommend it. I know there's lots of books like this, but this is very accessible, and it's a good place to start with some contemporary authors. Why We Write, 20 acclaimed authors on how and why they do what they do.
Okay. Now, if you can't get enough of politics and the last election, it's like a third book in a row here.
Definitely.
I have this new book here. It's called Collision 2012, Obama versus Romney and the Future of Elections in America. Again, I'm halfway through. It's really good. It covers a lot of the same ground in the Jonathan Alter book, but in sort of a different way. Dan Balz wrote a great book about the 2008 election called The Battle for America, 2008. He has a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. He works for the Washington Post. Yeah, Washington Post. He conducted major interviews with all the major players. It's got a lot of good behind-the-scenes stuff. A lot of his interviews he was able to get on the condition that he said what we're talking about, the interview, he wouldn't write it. He wouldn't write it till when the book came out, till after the election. I mean, he did file. He wrote all during the election for the Post, but I think he told them that for the book, a lot of the interviews were conducted like after a primary or after somebody won or lost, but they knew that it was sort of off the record until after the election. So he was able to get a lot of good information. There's a lot of great stories, great behind-the-scenes stuff in here. And again, it starts with the 2010 midterms, and again, he goes into how Obama built up his he calls it here building the army. He goes into the guys in the cave and stuff like that. The big middle section is all about the Republican debates and the nominating process. This was the one, everybody led for like 2 weeks. Bachman, Kane, Rick Perry, Santorum, Gingrich. So it's like I say, if you like behind the scenes political stuff, it's good. I'm only halfway through, and I'm going into the last section on the election. So again, good behind the scenes stuff from a pretty famous reporter, I guess. He's written a lot of books on elections. So Collision 2012, Obama versus Romney and the Future of Elections in America.
This next book is something I'm not familiar with, so sorry, I'm unwrapping myself here. This is called American Gun, A History of the United States in 10 Firearms. Now, this is kind of there have been a lot of books about, the history of the world in 100 objects, the history of the, in 5, whatever. So this is American Gun, A History of the U.S. in 10 Firearms. I know nothing about guns. It's written by Chris Kyle, who was the best-selling author of American Sniper. Chris Kyle was considered the top sniper in U.S. military history. He's a Navy SEAL. He did 4 tours in the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan. He actually died not too long ago, I think last year.
Oh, was he the guy that was shot at the range?
Yeah, maybe a few months ago. Now
He was shot at a firing range?
Yeah, he was trying to help someone.
Yeah,
and someone had post-traumatic stress syndrome, and he got caught in the crossfire. So he was quite young, and this is an interesting premise, certainly for someone like me that knows nothing about guns. And he really, because he's a warrior, he is able to dissect some of the famous battles in American history and how the type of weapon that a side had, how they were able to prevail, and even at the end, he's talking about the automatic weapons and how they're light and smaller, and so women can handle them, and that has allowed them to.
Is it just military guns?
No, here, I'll read the.
I mean, does he have guns on?
Well, let me read the American long rifle, and he's talking about the settling of the American West. Spencer repeater, Colt 45, Winchester rifles, Thompson submachine gun in World War I, 1911 pistol, 38 special police revolver, and the M16 rifle. But he tells stories really well. He starts a story about the Winchester, and he's Winchester 9363. I can't even see. I don't even remember. He's talking about Teddy Roosevelt, and you don't even know he's talking about Teddy Roosevelt the way he's presenting the story. It's fantastic. And so, like the Nellie Bly book, this is American history, but it's told in a very exciting way by someone who really knows the subject. And I actually found it interesting. I'm actually going to read it because it talks about the West and settling the West. It talks about the gunfights in the West. Obviously Teddy Roosevelt and the San Juan, what is that?
San Juan Hill?
San Juan
Rough
Hill,
Riders?
The Rough Riders, all that. I mean, it's really well done.
What kind of guns do they have?
Don't, you're asking me. That's pretty funny. And in the back, he talks about, he gives you specifics about the guns and
Okay.
the history of the guns, and because of his background, Chris Kyle, you know, he's kind of
All
an
right. Now, do you
expert.
remember that old show, The Rifleman?
Yes, I do.
I think he had a Winchester.
It might have. They've got pictures of the actors with their rifles. Yeah, in the old Wild West. Yep, Gary Cooper and
Okay.
all that. So, American Gun. It's
All right. I'm going to continue on my little theme I started with.
I'm glad I've got very different kinds of books.
I know. I started with that book, The Unwinding, and then I mentioned the Jonathan Alter book. It's called The Center Holds. He's saying how things are still held together a little bit. This book, again, is on the bestseller list. This guy would say everything has become totally unwound in Washington.
Oh.
Again, I don't have the cover. I have a picture of the cover because I don't have the book. It's called This Town. It got cut off at the bottom of Mark Leibovich. He writes for the New York Times Magazine. The subtitle is Two Parties and a Funeral, plus plenty of valet parking in America's gilded capital. Again, I'm about halfway through this. It's all about how money has taken over Washington, with over half of the people who leave Congress and the Senate become lobbyists. And it's all about the lobbyists, how much money they make, how some firms work for both sides, how they all know each other.
Yeah, that's what
they all
they
hang out with each other.
That's not new, but what's
Well-
new is he mentions names.
Well, the other thing is, the other two books I was saying are really good behind the scenes of the elections. This book, This Town, is about the behind the scenes of the behind the scenes
Because he's
people.
part of the group. I mean, that
He admits that. He's the first thing he says is he goes, I'm part of this. I know all these people, but he sort of names names, and some of it is really funny. I mean, I got to say it's really funny, but then you're like, oh my God, and then you're sort of very. Then it's like very disturbing.
The classic story in there is about during Tim Russard's
That's where the book
funeral.
opens, yeah.
Right, Tim Russard's funeral, how everybody's hobnobbing and networking
And they're giving out cards, and they're all saying, "Come on, you got to be on my show." So he really captures. I mean, if it's really like this, I don't go to Washington, but if it is, oh my God, it's. So he would say, going back to the other book, it's totally unwound. I mean, it's really. In fact, we probably won't get to it, but the Chris Hayes book, The Twilight of the Elites, is, again, I'm halfway through, is really good. He would say it's all unwound too. So I don't know. Only Jonathan Alter seems to be
a little.
seems to be a little more optimistic. But this book, This Town, there's been some excerpts in the New York Times in the last couple of Sunday magazines, and there was an excerpt in, I think, New York Magazine. But some of it's very funny, but it's
Depressing.
It's all, they all know each other. They all hang out together.
And
there's really no ideological bound. They all just sort of work. They're all just trying to get their money. But very entertaining. I mean, I'm telling you, very entertaining. So This Town,
It
Mark
confirms.
Leibovich.
These books
I know.
confirm what we've thought all along.
All right. Well, I think that's enough of my politics for now.
This one is this is called Clark Howard's Living Large for the Long Haul. Real stories from Americans who saved, lost, and saved again. This is a long title. Consumer-tested ways to overhaul your finances, increase your savings, and get your life back on track. Now, Clark Howard has a show on one of the cable networks, and I did bring to your attention his previous book. I can't remember, it doesn't tell me exactly when his other book was published, just a couple years ago, and that was called Living Large in Lean Times, and it was talking about just dealing with the economic downturn as if it was a blip on the radar screen. This is more like this is the new normal, so you have to think for the long term. And I find these books interesting. It confirms a lot of what I've learned in my 64 years, that I wish I'd known when I was 20 or 25 or 40. And it also teaches me some things. Like it says that Costco sells individual health insurance. Did you know that? Costco?
I did not. I wish I knew what I knew when I was 50.
And it has, other thing I knew from growing up with parents who were very poor during the Depression, it says live below your means, save, save, save. That's just something that I grew up with, but I know a lot of people didn't grow up with that. But other things like get a programmable thermostat, insulate your attic. Certainly I knew that as a homeowner. I learned that. Maybe I should have known it earlier. One thing that I've only learned recently is that when you pay off a credit card, don't close the account because that affects your credit score. So it's like, it really is a how-to consumer Bible kind of for the time, figuring out that this may be how it's going to be for a while, that the economy is going to, obviously is taking a long time to start chugging again, and it's not exactly chugging, it's kind of moving at a crawl. So for all you consumers out there, Clark Howard's Living Large for the Long Haul.
All right, I'll just go quick here at the end.
Okay.
I don't have a political book. I did enough of those. But if you're really interested in what they're calling the third golden age of television, which is all the shows since the Oz and the Sopranos and all those, mainly started on HBO, but have now went to AMC and the other networks. I must be on a jag of reading about behind the scenes stuff. This book is called Difficult Men. We have Walter White from Breaking Bad on top, Tony Soprano on the bottom. The subtitle is Behind the Scenes of a Creative Revolution, from The Sopranos and The Wire to Mad Men and Breaking Bad. They cover a lot of the shows, how they came about, sort of a reaction against how the network TVs in the 70s and 80s, where they were going, how some of the breakthrough shows like Oz and Sopranos.
What's Oz?
That was a show that takes place in prison.
Oh, okay.
It was on HBO before The Sopranos.
I thought maybe it was Dr. Oz. And I'm thinking
they all go back to the show that sort of broke it all open, was on the network. I've read there's some other books about this, was Hill Street Blues. So they go into that, but it's mainly about the shows, The Wire, The Sopranos, Mad Men, Deadwood, The Shield, Breaking Bad, Rescue Me's in here. Oh, there's a thing in the beginning here I'll go to.
Nitty gritty.
Yeah, Game of Thrones, Boardwalk Empire, Walking Dead, Sons of Anarchy, Nip Tuck, Generation Kill. So all the shows that obviously are not on networks. It's got great. I was skimming it. I read the parts about 3 shows that I really liked. The Wire, Mad Men, and 6 Feet Under. Very interesting how they came about, how they write the shows, some of the controversies, and just behind the scenes stuff. Very interesting if you're a fan of any of those shows. And it's a pretty short book. It's very interesting, called Difficult Men. And just as a sidelight, I saw this. If you're a fan of Mad Men, this is like an academic kind of analysis. It's a collection of articles. It's really like it's very scholarly. It's called Mad Men, Man World. It's a collection of articles by, I think, college professor types analyzing the show Mad Men. And I'll read just some of the titles of these chapters, and it's written by all different people. But very interesting, because people like Breaking Bad now is a big. People talk about these shows and they analyze them. What does it all mean for like Sopranos? So you get an idea what this book's about. These are some of the articles where they're talking about Mad Men. Okay, the titles. Some of these titles are very funny. I mean, some are just regular. Mad Space, representing the madman margins in the early 1960s, Northern Civil Rights, and the blues idiom. I'm not sure what that would be. After Sex, what? A feminist reading of reproductive history in Mad Men. The writer as producer, or the hip figure after HBO. The shock of the banal. Mad Men's progressive realism. So you get the idea of what these are about. Against depth.
DPTH?
Yes.
Depth.
Looking at surface through the Kodiak carousel. Remember that famous Mad Men episode when
No.
Don's got the old slides. And
Oh, the
he
slide,
did a
the
thing.
carousel, Kodak.
Yeah.
Kodak carousel? Okay.
Here's one called Maiden Form. Masculinity as Masquerade. There was a famous episode when Peggy, they all worked on the bra campaign.
The made of, oh,
So,
that sounds good.
so anyway, if you're into some deep analysis of a TV show, it's a Mad
It's
Men, Mad
analysis
World.
of the time, I think, of the 1960s and 70s.
All right, well, that is it for this time, and we will see you next time.